So talking about zoom as well. So if I need to zoom, I can use the eyeglass tool here, but not really efficient way of doing it. The best way to do this is by using Control and plus for the PC, or Control and the minus on your keyboard. So Control plus, zoom in, Control minus, zoom out for quick access. But alternatively, you can use the zoom tool here. To navigate around this, you can use your scroll if you have a mouse that's accessible where you can scroll up, down, left, right. But this hand tool also helps navigate around your space. So if I grab that hand tool, if I click and hold, I can move that space anywhere I would like. Again, I can use it by selecting this from the toolbar. Alternatively, say I'm on an arrow, I can also hit the space bar on my keyboard, which allows me to move around here. This is a much quicker, much more efficient way to move around that space. Talking about the rulers on here. So we have a vertical and a horizontal ruler. These are really great to understand what the measurements of your document or your page are. If they happen to not be there right now, you can go view rulers and you could say hide rulers. You can also hit Control R to get those suckers back up there. I personally really like to have those up there. They're helpful to gather the size that we need, or to maybe use these as guides, which we will talk about later. And say, for instance, right now, I have my document set up here, and I've set these up in inches. But what if I want to adjust those? Because now maybe I'm working in something that's centimeters. If I go over to my ruler here, I can actually just right click and adjust those to centimeters. And it does auto adjust both sides. So once you change one side, it does automatically move and adjust the other side. One of the things that makes Illustrator really great is the ability to have layers. And I'm sure other programs that you're working in also has the same. I just want to touch upon working with those layers, or how to effectively work with those layers. So this panel would be in your Essentials toolbar, and it'll look like a little stacked, two stacked pages here. If you do want to pull that menu out, you can just go ahead and grab that, click and drag that out. Just for the purpose of the tutorial, I'm just going to bring it out here. So you can see that everything is currently on default on that first layer. So that's there for now. It's not layered. Again, we're just kind of working with working our tutorial. But say, for example, I want to go ahead and maybe add a background to this document. We'll talk about how we can fill fill those shapes and the arrangements at another time, but just discussing the layers. So if I have a background layer and then I have my shapes, these are two things that I would probably prefer to keep on their own layers. So I would, for example, go ahead and add a new layer, and I'm going to go ahead and take my shapes, and just like we had just discussed previously, when we copy paste, we can do the same by edit and cut, or Control X. And I'm going to go ahead and lock that layer up, and I'm going to just go and hit edit, paste. Another way we can paste is if we want to go in the exact same spot we had it previously, we can say paste in place. So now we can see we have our locked background layer, and you can see that we have our shape layer. So that's really great. They're separated, but talking about layer organization and ensuring that we label these properly is going to be the success of utilizing the layers effectively. So say, for example, I don't like this blue color, or I don't like this outline is red. In addition to update and change the name of those, all we have to do is double click, and we can either change the layer here. So we can call this background. So I double click directly on the name, or double click outside of that, and we get a little menu that pops up. So here's where I can call this shapes. And here's also where I can adjust the color of those shapes. So this will come in handy, for example, if you do have lots of fine details and maybe I'm working in a stroke that is an orange tone, having my layer color in an orange is not really effective. We want to build a little bit of contrast. So maybe I'll go and select that and make it green instead. So that really helps with the organization, being able to change the color, being able to effectively label those. And when you go ahead and you click the arrow, you can see all the details in there. So if I open up shapes, I can see that I have a poly tool here. And I can also see that I have a poly tool here. You can adjust the width of this. You can see the, not the poly tool, sorry, a poly shape. So you can see those actual details. If I happen to have tons and tons and tons of items within this layer, I can also go and click over on this far right side to specifically go ahead and click those on their own. I can do that from here. And it's just really helpful in case, in the case when you do get multiple layers and multiple objects in there. Talking about our appearance panel and our transform panel. So these are two different panels that kind of moderately work together. So in our appearance panel, we'll start with this. If I go ahead and click this shape, I can automatically see from here all of the details or any effects that I have added to the shape. So it shows the stroke width. I'm just going to go ahead and adjust the color so we can see this. So not only does it show the color of that stroke, it shows the width and the opacity. How dark is this? Do I have a bit of a transparency on this or not? And then it also shows a fill. If I add any drop shadows, any other effects that we'll get into later in the turn, these will all show up here. And we can also use the appearance panel to adjust the stroke, and we can hide those fills and those strokes as well. So you briefly spoke about the transform panel. This is where we can also go in. I'm just going to change this back to inches. This is also where we can go in and change the size of things, change the radius. We can rotate. There's our radius there if we need to adjust the corners. The properties, if we want to add more. So in particular, this is for that polygon. So if we want to go in and afterwards adjust the sides, we can do so. One of the things I do want to highlight are these two little check boxes, which is the scale corners and the scale strokes. So for example, right now, because these are both checked on, if I enlarge this shape, it is in fact going to increase my stroke width. If I don't scale my corners, and it also ensured that the radius of those corners, the proportions stayed the same. If I uncheck those, if I shrink this down teeny tiny, you can see that it now turns into a circle because it did not scale those corners to change with it. And it also kept that stroke width the same. Now we've kind of hit that max as to how big that is. Let's try it with this one. So now we can see if we don't, we can see how thick that stroke is. Alternatively, if we keep those on, it actually, in fact, kind of keeps that same shape and scales down the proportions of that stroke with it. Both of those can be helpful at different times. I think to keep things consistent from a sense of look and feel, you'll want to maybe have these checked off. So for example, if you have a stroke on all of your shapes, you're going to want that stroke to be consistent throughout. So you'll want to keep those checked. Or if you want to make sure that we don't end up in an instance where we have a super thick stroke on something very tiny and we want just those proportions to look the same, that's where we'll keep those on. Working with our line panel. So this would be something if you don't have it over on your essentials, this is one of those panels that you probably will use quite often. So you can also just go window align. So again, just for the purpose of the tutorial, I'm going to bring that one out. So for example, if we want to align both of these squares, this is a great tool to choose an axis. So if we want this to align to the left, the right, etc., we can utilize here. So if I go ahead and select both of these squares and say left align, then they align over to left. And again, we can align these to the top. So super helpful when it comes down to keeping things nice and straight and aligned on a particular axis. So what I do want to show you is the difference between aligning to. So if I select all of these objects, we can see aligning to selection is here. So that means that it's only going to work with these three objects. If I go ahead and hit the top, that's where they're going to align with the highest object there. If I switch this over to align to artboard, you'll see what happens when I click this. It now aligns to the top of here. Again, both are going to be super helpful at different times. This will just be a moment where you are going to decide which is going to be more helpful. If I say need to distribute the space between these evenly, I can go ahead and select all of these objects and we can distribute that space evenly across the page, or with the selection and we can distribute the space evenly. If we're aligning our objects and we say want to center things, so if I go ahead and center, it's going to default to one of the objects that it uses as its center point. If you say, for example, want everything to center or align with, say, this object, then you can actually, in fact, just say we can make these different sizes. If we go ahead and select all three of those, over on the Align To, we can click this, which is Align to Key Object. And this is where you'll see an extra highlight. So it defaulted to that bottom one. So you can see if I say center, it centers to that bottom one. If I hit that Align to Key Object and I select, go ahead and click this one. And if you say center, you can see everything snaps up to that top point as well. So these little tools down here will be quite helpful. Another tool that's going to be helpful is the distribute spacing. So you can actually go ahead and adjust how much you want these to be vertically distributed, for example, or how much you want them to be distributed for horizontally or vertically. So lots of variation or various ways you can use these. These are quite commonly used in Illustrator to distribute spacing, to align objects, and then to, again, essentially align to page or align to your selection and then set that key point.